Welcome to part 2 of my scene graph tutorial. This part covers a lot of things to do with spawning and despawning entities and prefabs, and also a lot of stuff with transforms and keyframe movements, and you can do some pretty crazy stuff with it. If you want to make really highly reusable stuff for like platformers or anything with animations really, this is a good way to do it. So just keep in mind, I highly recommend watching my first part of my scene graph tutorial. I go over a lot of basic stuff that I don't cover in this video, so if you're a little bit confused, I recommend watching that first. Also, I just want to apologize in advance because the audio in this video might be sometimes a bit crackly. I tried to, get rid of most of it, but warn you if it's gonna happen. Just keep that in mind. So the first thing in this video I'm going to cover is spawning and despawning entities and prefab entities. And the way we're going to be doing that is using verse tags. If you want to enable that, or just enable scene graph in general in a project, you want to go to project, you want to go down to project settings, scroll a bit down to scene graph system, and it's actually already enabled. What we want to look for is experimental features, and in here we got the tag component. Also, it's important to note that using the tag component, you won't be able to publish while using it. But if you actually want to publish your map and everything, you can use different things like finding entities or finding components, or like different things like that. There's different ways to define things, if that makes sense. So you can use alternative ways. I'm just going to use tags because it's just the easiest way. You can find different things in different ways. Anywho, let's get started. First things first, I'm going to go into Verse up here, and I'm going to go into Verse Explorer. To actually use tags, we're going to have to make a file that can actually use them. So we're just going to right click, add a Verse file to the project. We're going to make a Verse device, and this is going to be called I'm going to call it tags for scene graph. We're going to create an empty inside of Verse. Just want to type using, and we're going to add in a bunch of modules to, make tags work. First one we want is fortnite.com/devices. Next we want another one, and another one. The second one we want is verse.org/simulation. The next one is unreal.com/temporary diagnostics. And lastly, we just need our tags, so we're just going to do verse.org/simulation and then /tags. And that will do there. Now we actually make our tag. Tags are pretty easy to make. I'll show you how to do the last part, but basically you just want to type the name of the tag. So this would be remove this tag, and then we need to make it of a type class tag. So to do that, we want to do equals to class tag, and there we go. Perfect. So this tag is going to be used to despawn entities. So we're going to put this tag on certain scene graph entities, and then we'll be able to use that to despawn different things. So that's all we have to do in here. We'll just compile it and save. Now it's important to remember that building your verse code is very important if you want to update everything. So just go up to here in the build. So go up to here in the verse and just build verse code. You can also do Control-Shift-B if you want to shortcuts, but you can also just go up there. Anywho, so now that we have our tag set up, before we actually start with all the spawning and everything, we'd actually need to make a prefab first. To do that, we're just going to go down to here. I'll make a new folder called prefabs. So once we have this folder made, we're going to go inside of it, and I'm just going to right click, and we're going to go up to entity prefab definition, and we're just going to make an entity prefab. This is going to be our spawn, despawn, prefab. So we're going to go inside of it. Now, if you've seen the first part, you know how this all works, so I'm not going to explain it in full detail, but we're just going to add in an entity, and inside of this entity, we're just going to go into its details, and we're going to add a component, which is going to be for a mesh component, and I'm just going to make a cube. I'm going to reposition it onto the up here, and there we go. Now, we're going to use the tags we just made. So we're going to go into component again, and we're going to go down to tag component, and then inside of here now, we're going to edit, and we're going to add in this tag. So now we have that tag inside of here. If I just add this to the scene, you're going to see that obviously it's not going to be ready, so I'm just going to save it first. There we go. You want to go into the child entity, and there we go. Look, we now have everything inside of here. Now, just as an example, I'm going to drag out another one, and then inside of this one, I'm actually going to delete the tag that's inside of it. So we can have an example of what one looks like if it has a tag and if it didn't have a tag. So now we actually need to make our component that we're going to put all our behavior into. So we're going to go open the verse, and we're going to go into our explorer, and then we're actually going to make a new verse file. And then inside this file, we're going to make it a scene graph component. I'm going to call it something like spawn despawn components, and that should be a good name for it. And I'm going to create it. Now, if you just go up to our verse button up here, or just open VS Code by clicking one of these. So now all we have to do now is we'll just clean this up a little bit. So we'll just do this and use well. There we go. Now, with this component now, we're just going to go back into here. We're going to go into, what we want to do is you want to add the verse component into a certain position on this prefab control thing, if that makes sense. Now, since this is a tag, we don't want to necessarily use the entity we're going to be spawning and despawning, because if we're running the code on that, when it despawns, the code will stop running, so it won't ever come back, because, it's not going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to outliner in here, and we're just going to go to the very top one, not the world one, but this one. And then we're going to go into details, and we're going to add our verse components in here. So we're gonna find our spawn, despawn component, and there we go. Ignore the custom int, that's just a leftover. Now we technically don't need on simulation here, so we're just gonna get rid of it. So basically, this component we're gonna do is that for every tagged entity that's going to be under that's going to be client entity with tag, we're going to despawn. It's pretty straightforward. All we gotta do is we're just gonna do for tagged entity. We're then just gonna get the entity. We're gonna get the simulation entity, and then with this now we're gonna find descendant entities with tag. So in here we need to put our tag, so we're just gonna locate where our tag is. We're gonna grab it like so, and we're just gonna put it in here with 2 square brackets. This is gonna be all red and everything, just ignore that, it's fine. And now the way we actually spawn and despawn different entities is we need to when we're spawning in stuff, we need to get the parents to spawn it onto, and we're just going to use the tag to remove things. So we're going to actually find the parent of the entity. So we're just going to do this. We're going to do tagged entity, and we're going to do get parent. After that, we're just going to do oh shit, I just realized I spelled this wrong. That's supposed to be ... There we go. Now there's 2 specific ways you remove and add different things. To remove from the scene is pretty easy. You just gotta do tagged entity, and it's an inbuilt function called remove from parent. Remove from parent like this, and that's gonna remove it from the parent. And that's how you would remove entities from a parent. So this is removing, but let's say if I wanted to add something. This is where the parent comes in. We're gonna do parent, and we're gonna do add entities, which is a specific thing that allows us to add entities. And then inside of this, we're gonna do an array, and inside of our array, we're gonna then get our tagged entity, and it's gonna add it back to our parent that we found earlier, which is going to be the parent where the tag entity is, so it's going to be the same as the parent where it's from. I'm also going to add in a sleep here, so you can just, sleep. We're just going to save everything. There we go. The despawn component is now updated now. And if we just push our changes to like whatever, it should work. Thing has disappeared, and it should come back any second now. So future me here, I'm just from the future, okay? SceneGraph really hates when you try to respawn entities that have been despawned. So you get this weird behavior where you can't see it, but the collision is still there, and it just is a bit buggy and unreliable. But something like this would be more reliable. We're not actually spawning or despawning anything. What we're doing is we're finding the mesh component inside of our tagged entity, and we're just going to disable sleep and then enable sleep in a loop, and basically that will make it so it blinks in and out, and it should work pretty much how we want it to do anyways. Technically, this is not spawning anything or despawning anything, so I'll get to more examples of how you can actually do that later, so don't worry. And back in game, as you can see now, it's actually doing what we wanted to do, and it's blinking in and out, and obviously the ones we have the tag on is working, and the one we don't have the tag on is not working, because it shouldn't be working. So very quickly, the next example I'm just going to do is, how would you spawn in a prefab? Well, the actual method to add it is fairly similar to components and entities. This is generally speaking, we want to add entities to the simulation entity when we're talking prefabs. So what we want to do is we want to do if simulation entity is equal to entity.getSimulationEntity, like that. That should generally be how you would get it. We don't want to get with what other prefab we want. This is going to be equal to our prefab. So to actually get our prefab, we need to do something very specific. And we have to find the folder where our prefab actually is. All we want to do is find our prefab inside of our common drawer. And here it is, our spawn despawn prefab. And that's inside our prefabs folder. So this specific directory is what we're going to use to find our prefab when we're trying to, get it in verse code. So all we type is prefabs and then dot spawn despawn prefab, and then just like anything, we're going to initialize it as a type of spawn despawn prefab or whatever, the same exact thing with the little curly brackets at the end right there. Now what we basically just did is create an entirely new entity that is using our prefab we've made, so we can actually use this to spawn it in anywhere we want. And considering it's a prefab, we're going to use the simulation entity, and we're going to use the exact same thing we used earlier, which is add entities on the simulation entity with our prefab, and now we're going to be adding it to basically the simulation entity. So we just made a prefab. Now this is actually going to work unlike before, because we haven't despawned this yet. We're making out this thin air and we're spawning it in. So now once we add this in, it's actually going to spawn at, I think, 000 in the world, in the simulation entity, because this actually doesn't have a transform inside of it just yet. That being said, let's say if we wanted to add a transform, adding in entities, or when we want to transform components, so we want to add in an identity transform to this to make it actually be somewhere in the world. So to actually make that happen, what we're going to do is we're going to go into here. We're going to define a transform. So we're going to do identity transform like this, and it's going to be equal to transform. And transforms, if you don't know what they are, the transforms contain translation, rotation, and scale. So everything inside of our world basically has a transform. So for example, if you look at this random player spawner, this, as you can see, has a transform that contains a translation, rotation, and scale. Now, currently, UEFN uses the LUF system, which is the left up forward system. This recently replaced the XYZ, and it'll affect the translation and scale thing specifically. And the way you get rotation is a little bit different, so we'll get into it in a minute. It's also important to mention that this spawner is right now the translation is relative to the middle of the world. So 0, 0, 0, because it's the global transform right now. But if you're going to work with scene graph, and if you have a child entity of like a prefab, that child entity is going to be, its transform is going to be relative depending on the origin of the prefab. And then that prefab is probably going to be relative to the world then of the simulation entity, just like our spawner over here. You can actually change the origins depending on the entity. So you can actually swap the origins of the entity, and then in verse, you can actually grab either the local transform or the global transform, which is very, very helpful. So depending on where you want your thing to be or what data you want to grab, make sure you just keep that in mind. You can change the origin here, or you can just use the global transform. So back in our verse code, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a translation, rotation, and scale. So first we're going to use a translation, and inside of here, we're going to use a vector 3, and then inside of vector 3, we're going to use add left, and we're going to do equals to 0, 0 or 0.0. This needs to be a float, just keep that in mind. Then we just do the exact same thing for up and forward. So yeah, there we go. Just like that, and that's going to store our translation. Next, we're going to need rotation, and we're going to make that equal to make rotation from yaw pitch roll degrees. And then that's going to let us be able to use rotation. And then inside, and wait, hold on, sorry, this is just one more thing. I forgot, I spelled that wrong. There we go. That's the way you do it. I know, yeah, I actually forgot to add in a new module, which is diverse.org/spatial math module. So let me just do that. There we go. And then once we have that now, we just gotta put 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and that's gonna store our yaw pitch roll for our rotation. Lastly, we need our scale, and we'll just do the exact same thing. I'm literally just gonna copy the stuff from up here, and I'm gonna paste it down there. And there we go. That's gonna be our transform, and we're gonna use this to store our transforms. And now to actually add this to the prefab we want before we spawn it in, we just want to go in between here. Considering this is a prefab, chances are we want to use the simulation entity, so we're going to use the global transform for this. So we're going to do prefab we want dot set global transform, and we're going to set that to our transform, which is identity transform from up there. That's going to add our transform we just made. Just so I can test this easier, I'm just going to add a sleep so I can actually see it spawn in, if that makes sense. So yeah, there we go. Now to actually place our thing somewhere, or make our transform actually do something instead of just spawning it in the middle of the world, I'm going to get this little guy right here, and I'm going to move him, and I'm just going to copy the coordinates of like this position where he goes right here. And then when we spawn in our next entity, if we use these exact same translation of coordinates, it will spawn there in the world when we do so, which is pretty cool. Also, just to prevent multiple things from spawning, just remember to remove the verse components from these guys. Just keep the verse component in one entity, so you're not spawning multiple guys at the same spot. It's also important to keep in mind you don't have to use global transform here. You can also use something like set local transform. If you remember what I was saying earlier, that uses the local transform, not the global transform. Just keep that in mind if you want to do local transforms. Should happen any second, any minute now, any second, any minute now, any hour now, any year now. Wait. I know why it's not working. I made the scale 0, so when it spawns in, it's going to not even have it's not going to be visible. Okay, put the scale to 1 in each value, so it's going to be scale to 1, and it should work now. And now once I load in, it seems to be working now, and it's actually spawning here, which is pretty cool. And this should technically work for pretty much like entities or components. Like this kind of same like setup with transforms can do the same thing. So yeah, pretty cool. Oh yeah, and further going on to transforms, if you just look at the documentation, you can notice there's a few different examples of transforms you can use. So like you can have all fields, you can only have only translation, and you can also have transforms that don't change anything like the one we made, or we didn't actually make it, but the one we made initially until we changed it. Okay, now this example worked because we got a prefab that already had a transform inside of it, so we didn't actually have to make a transform component and add it to the entity. Now, let's say if we wanted to make an entity, but how would we add a transform component and then also then add a transform instead of that transform component? to make it work. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning. I'm gonna keep this, but I'm just gonna make it 0, 0, so we don't have to rewrite it all out. This is gonna be our transform we're gonna be using. So let's say if I wanted to add an entity to our thing, it's basically the same thing we did with the prefabs. So we just want to do entity. It's gonna be some random entity, and it's gonna be of type entity equal to entity. Or let's show this new entity. There we go. And there we go. That's our new entity. Now this new entity has nothing in it, okay? This is made out of thin air, okay? We need to add stuff to it, like a transform components or a mesh or etc. Make it do things. So to get that to happen, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to here. We're gonna add a component. So we're gonna do new entity and we're gonna do add components. Now this can be the array thing where it's like an array and then you put the components in here. And then inside of here you do transform components like in this. And it's gonna add the components. But the entity of this is equal to the entity. You can do something like this where you add the component to like this, or what you can do is put it below down here. Then we do of array like this. This is just a different way of running it out. And now let's say if we also want to add a mesh to this, you can type in mesh components, but the problem with this is that this is like an empty thing. It doesn't have anything in it. So if we actually wanted to make a mesh component, we need to make a custom mesh component, if that makes sense. Now, very quickly, I went into modeling mode and I just got a new mesh. It's very quickly, just go into modeling mode, go into create box, and then just place it down and you accept it right there. And you'll be able to get a folder called meshes with a box mesh inside of it. Now, if we build our verse code, basically this will automatically generate a verse asset, if that makes sense, like a custom mesh asset for verse. Now, let's say if we wanted to add in a mesh component that's like a custom mesh or something like that. If I go into our assets digest first, or file over here, you can now see we have box mesh inside of here. And if I go over to the side, you're going to see now that it's a class mesh component. So it's going to actually work for us if we make it so it's equal to a mesh component. All we got to do is just type in meshes box mesh, and that's going to be the same as typing like mesh component. If we set the entity to our new entity, that mesh component, which is going to be our box, is going to now be inside of our new entity we just spawned through the add components function. Okay, now once we have our transform component and also our mesh that we can also use, that's going to be added to our new entity. So now our new entity now has stuff inside of it. So next thing we want to do is we want to actually set our transform to our identity transform. So we'll do new entity and we'll do set local transform, and this is going to be set to our identity transform up there. And that's going to be on local, so it's going to be where it is. I'll do global if you want. We could even actually, I might just do global. Make my life easier. And then what we'll do next is we'll then add this to the simulation entity, which is just if we'll do simulation entity is equal to entity dot get simulation entity. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get our simulation entity. We're going to do add entities, second for entities. We're gonna add the entity of the array, and we're gonna put our new entity in there. And there we go. So now instead of using a prefab to get a spawn in or something like that, we're now just making an entity inside verse and then adding components to it and then spawning it in, which is pretty cool. Now hopefully this will work. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just set to a certain coordinates like 100, 100. That should be okay. Put the 0, 0. It's gonna be in the sky, I think. So we'll just build verse code and we'll push our changes. So yeah, so now we spawned in a new entity right here, which is pretty cool. This is a completely new entity that was never based on anything like prefab or something like that. This is completely unique. Now, you may notice that we can walk through it. This is because the collision was never set up in the mesh. That's a whole other thing you can do. So yeah. And oh yeah, if you want to know how to get like a mesh collision, you just want to click inside the mesh in the contour and go up to collision up here and just add box simplified collision, and it's gonna add it. I did it off the way because there's already one there. But yeah, that's how it works. Alright, so I just deleted everything. We're gonna start from a fresh thing, and next thing we're gonna talk about is how to do keyframe movement. Keyframe movements in scene graph is extremely useful for animations. Like you see on your screen, all these boxes are moving using the same exact animation component. So to get started, I'm going to go into my content drawer and I'm going to make a new prefab. Inside of here now, I'm going to make a new entity. Then inside this entity, I'm going to add a keyframed movement component. What we'll do now is we'll do components, then we'll now make a new verse component up here, and we're just going to call it like our keyframed movement cycle or something like that. Doesn't matter. And then we'll just create it. And if you just add that to here as well, whereas a keyframe movement cycle, now we have it in here. And also, while I'm also here, I'm gonna add a mesh so I can actually see it. I'm gonna add cube. There we go. So we can actually see what we're working with. Okay, I just went in and cleaned this all up. It's all nice and better now. Now what we need to add first is inside of using, we need a very specific module. We're going to use the module verse.org/scenegraph keyframed movement. So just put that in there. And also, like before, we're going to be using transforms. So we're going to need verse.org/spatial math as well. So inside of here, we're going to add in an editable. This is going to be an editable that's going to be an array that's going to store all of our keyframes. Now, if you don't know what a keyframe is, basically a keyframe is a position in a movement. So a good example of this would be a sequence or a sequence inside the sequencer. Place keys at certain points, and then if you play the sequence, it's going to transition between each of those points. We're going to make a variable called keyframes. This is going to be an array of keyframe. We're going to do keyframe the movement delta, which is going to be the type of thing it's going to store, and then we'll do array like that. So we have an editable keyframe array that stores keyframe movement delta. Back inside of our prefab, you're going to go up to over here in the keyframe movement cycle, and you can now see we have keyframes. And if I add an element, you're going to see all this new stuff here. And this is going to be what's inside the keyframe. So as you can see, there's a transform, which is that stores the location of the keyframe. You have a duration, which is how long the keyframe will take to transition from it to another keyframe. And you also have easing, which will change the rate of how the key will interpolate to the next key, which I'll show you what that actually means in a second. So you have some common ones like linear, ease out, ease in out, or ease in. This is going to be a lot easier to explain if I have a sequence open. But first, we got ease in out. Basically, what this is that it will slowly go in and then slowly go out. Then we got ease in, which is slow going in, and then it immediately goes out. Now, the opposite is for ease out, which is going to be starting with a linear and then ending with a cubic. You can also do two linear keys, so that would be a constant speed with no change of movement. And that's basically how the different easings work. So as you can see in here, we have all the different examples I just showed you, but you can just pick them and freely do whatever you want. Now this right here is actually just a singular keyframe. If you want to add another keyframe, you want to go into this little plus sign and you want to add something to the array, and that's going to add a new movement keyframed movement delta thing to this array. So we can add multiple keys and play them in succession. But the way this will work is that each keyframe is after each other. So if I add like another one down here, if this moves like 500 up, this keyframe is going to start at 500 up. So you got to keep that in mind. So if I want to move this up and then to the side, I want to add forward 500 like that. So this is going to first move up for 2 seconds, and then it's going to move 500 to the side for 5 seconds. And then finally, I might want to move it down. So remember, it's from the relative point with the last keyframe ended. So it's going to be, so that's 500 up and then 500 across, 500 down. So that'll go back down to the ground. And minus would be minusing down the Z direction or up or whatever. You can also scale it as well. At least the scale is default 0. This is unlike before. If you set this to 1, it's going to scale up because it's relative, remember. So 0 would be the same size and 1 would be, I think, twice the size. Remember, it's additive, so if it's 1 and the scale's already 1, it's going to add 1 to the scale, so it's going to be 2, so it's going to be twice the size. It's also important to note that SceneGraph hates it when you do negative scaling, so just never do that and only do 0 point something. So once you have all your keys constructed, next step is to just go game and see if it works. But you're gonna see that nothing happens. Your thing is just sitting here doing absolutely nothing. This is because we actually need to activate the animation we just made. So to actually add functionality to this, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to utilize our keyframe movements component to do all the movements and everything. So to do that, we're gonna do if, and then we'll call this our KFM is equal to entity.getComponent. And then we're going to use keyframed movement components like that. There we go. And then do two little dots again. Then below it, what we're going to do next is we're going to get KFM, and we're going to use a special function called set keyframes. This is going to actually add the keyframes to our, our thing. And the keyframes we need is up there in the array, so we're just going to call it keyframes. Now, this set keyframes takes an array of keyframe delta, and also if you read it there, it needs also a movement playback mode. Now the easiest way to get the movement mode is that if we go back up here, we're just going to define it up here, which this is going to be our playback mode, and we're going to set it to keyframed movement playback mode, and we're going to equal that to what kind of playback mode it's going to be. So there's 3 kinds. There's a loop, which loops it. There's one shot, which goes once, and then there's ping pong, which goes forward and then backwards and forward and backwards. For this case, I'm going to use loop, and then we're looking for you can just press tab and then it'll go in like that. And then you do 2 brackets like that, and there we go. Back inside of here, we're just gonna now add in our playback mode, which is gonna be, you know, that, and that should work like that. All we have to do is use the function Keyframed.play, and now this will make our animation loop on our scene graph entity, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, you can do things like stopping it. There's a bunch of different things that I do. If I hold control, click on this. There's a bunch of things like pause, play, stop, stop even with blend out time. So it's pretty versatile. But anyways, after this now, we're just going to compile this. And now if you're actually going to game it should be working now. Okay, and just an example, if you want to figure how to write these out, it's literally just one shots and also ping pong, or you write them out like that. So now in game, we should be able to see now that our cube is now moving. Now I did speed it up a little bit, and so it's going to be slightly faster because it's kind of slow. But basically, this will now loop. Now I'm going to move there. It goes 500 up, 500 across, and 500 down. And it's going to keep doing that basically forever, unless if you set it up to stop. Let's say if this was ping pong mode, it would stop there, and then it'll go back up like that, and it's going to go back down again. If it was one shot, it would go up, across, it down, and then it would stay where it was and never move over again, unless if you do it again. So there's a bunch of different options you can pick. They all, you know, work pretty well. Keyframe movement's also very helpful because it's outside, I believe, the verse, like, you know, cycle. So something like move to or teleport to is going to be updated every single, you know, it's going to be taxing, but this is a lot less taxing on everything. So for example, you can have a bunch of these running at the same time, which is perfect for scene graph because you have a lot of scene graph props probably at the same time. And if you want to place a bunch at all different timings and everything, you can. It looks pretty cool. So yeah, keyframe movement is so useful for like a lot of stuff. If you want to do a lot of stuff that's moving, like I know Epic likes to use the example of a lantern on a post, like swaying in the wind. Like you can do whatever your imagination cooks up, I guess. I was gonna do sweeps and everything in this episode, but it's getting pretty long, okay? I gotta be real. And I want to get this part out early, so I'm just going to end it here, okay? Also, again, sorry about the audio quality throughout the video. The recording of this part was a bit cursed, okay? I'll be honest, it was a bit cursed, but hopefully it should be fixed by the next video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Remember to like, subscribe, remember to use my code in the front item shop. Thank you to all the members of the channel, and remember to watch all these videos for more of my tutorials. That's about it. I'll see you all around.